I was reading about this classic psychology experiment. Picture yourself in the lab. All you have to do is stare at a screen. For just a fraction of a second, they flash two simple things. Let's say a big red X and a small blue O. Then the screen goes blank. The researcher asks what you saw. Easy, you say, I saw a red O and a blue X. You're completely 100% confident.
Right. Sounds straightforward.
But the researcher writes something down because a red O was never there. What happened? The redness from one object just floated free and incorrectly glued itself to the O from the other. This isn't a failure of your eyes, it was a failure of time.
Time. Okay.
Your brain, it turns out, sees red and X as two separate things in two different parts of your mind. It needs a second crucial step, a kind of mental spotlight to bind them together.
The binding step.
The little mistake you made in the lab, that illusory conjunction, accidentally reveals the entire hidden two-stage process your brain is running right now just for you to make sense of the world.
It's a fascinating window into how vision actually works.
Welcome to the deep dive. That simple lab error, the illusory conjunction, well, it really shows us just how active and non-seamless the process of vision really is.
Definitely not automatic, not in the way we usually think.
Today, we're undertaking a deep dive into the feature integration theory, or FIT, the foundational concept that explains how your conscious mind executes that mental spotlight, gluing the messy raw data of color, shape, and location into coherent objects.
And that failure of binding under time pressure, that's really the key to understanding the entire system. Our mission today is to trace this two-stage assembly line of sight.
Right.
From the necessary trade-offs between speed and focus to the neural geography responsible for coordinating the features. We'll examine how this system adapts across the animal kingdom.
Yep.
And crucially, how these fundamental psychological principles are now being used to design life-saving visual interfaces, like those found in, say, nuclear control rooms.
Okay, let's unpack this then. We're starting right at the beginning with the structure of sight itself. Feature integration theory, FIT, posits that our visual world is built in two very different steps.
That's right. A vast, quick, sort of parallel effort, followed by a much narrower, slower, serial effort.
So stage one first. Tell us about that.
Think of stage one, the pre-attentive stage, as the brain's massive intake manifold. This stage is automatic, high capacity, and lightning fast.
Automatic, okay.
It processes basic visual features like color, size, orientation, and movement simultaneously across the entire visual field.
All at once.
All at once. Critically, it registers that these features exist, but it doesn't yet know which feature belongs to which object. They're kind of free-floating.
So if I walk into a stadium, stage one registers red, blue, large size, small size, and movement everywhere, instantly.
Exactly.
It's registering the raw ingredients without baking the cake.
Precisely. And this leads to the remarkable pop-out effect. You've probably experienced this.
Oh, yeah.
If a target differs from all the distracting objects around it by one of these basic features, say, a single red apple in a bin of green apples, or maybe a line oriented vertically in a sea of horizontal lines, the search is fast and automatic.
Why is it automatic then?
Because the visual system doesn't need to scan sequentially. That feature difference, that single unique feature, is registered globally by stage one. It just pops out at you.
This is the difference between an easy visual search and a hard one, right? Spotting a single gray fish among a large group of white fish is easy because the difference in color is processed in parallel.
Exactly. The number of white fish doesn't really slow you down much, if at all. It pops out.
But that's not always the case. What happens when it's not just one feature?
Right. Contrast that with the transition to stage two, the costly realm of focused attention, or what we call serial search.
This is where we pay the price for complexity. When the object you're searching for is defined by a conjunction of features.
A combination, yeah.
For example, you are looking for a gray fish that is also facing right, and there are other gray fish facing left, and other white fish facing right. Well, now you've entered the sequential bottleneck.
That's it. The brain can no longer use the stage one features to instantly locate the target, because those individual features, grayness and right-facingness, are present in the distractors too.
They're floating free again.
They're floating freely, exactly. So to accurately identify the target, your brain must actively bond gray and facing right together at the same spatial location.
And that binding, that gluing process you mentioned, requires focused attention, the mental spotlight.
It absolutely does. And this necessitates a serial search. The brain has to inspect each individual object in the display, one after the other.
One by one.
One by one, until it finds the atom where the features are correctly bound. The inevitable consequence, and this has been confirmed across hundreds of studies, is that your reaction time increases proportionally to the number of distracting objects present.
So more stuff to look through, the longer it takes.
Precisely. You are literally moving your attention from item 1 to item 2 to item 3, verifying the conjunction at each step.
That perfectly explains the opening scenario then. If you don't give the brain enough time to conduct that sequential item-by-item verification, stage 2, the free-floating features from stage 1 get incorrectly combined, resulting in the illusory conjunction, the red O that was never there.
Exactly. And what's crucial for you to understand is that this model isn't some fragile lab finding, it's fundamental. Researchers have taken this theory out of the basic psychology lab and tested it in environments that mimic high visual complexity.
Like those control panels you mentioned.
Right, like nuclear control panel displays.
Okay, tell us about that. How did those applied studies confirm that serial search is the operating system under load?
Well, they basically manipulated the visual environment to force participants into a serial search. The participants search for a specific target, let's say a random 3-digit number.
Okay.
In the low visual load condition, that target number was surrounded by items clearly labeled 00.
Easy to spot the difference.
Very easy. Easily distinguishable, allowing for quick feature rejection based on shape. Stage 1 could handle that. But in the high visual load condition, the target number was surrounded by other random, unique 3-digit numbers.
Ah, so now you can't just look for not 000.
Exactly. In that high load condition, the brain couldn't rely on the unique feature of the 1000 shape to filter out distractors quickly. It was forced to check the conjunction of the 3 specific digits at each location.
It had to perform that serial search.
It had to. And consistently, that high visual load condition reliably resulted in significantly higher reaction times. The time needed to find the target increased with every additional random number present.
So it scales linearly with the number of items.
Pretty much. This validated the core prediction of FIT. When the pre-attentive stage cannot filter the noise using a single feature, the system is forced into the slow, resource-intensive sequential inspection to bind the target features.
Okay, so feature integration theory holds up under pressure. But this raises what you call the binding problem. It's maybe the most profound question in visual neuroscience, isn't it?
It really is.
If color is processed in one part of the brain and motion in another and shape in a third, how does the brain unify these disparate signals into the single coherent object that I see right now?
It's a tremendous feat of coordination, you're right. Features of an object are processed in segregated pathways. Color may be in areas like V4, motion in areas like MT, location often involving parietal regions.
Different specialists, essentially.
Exactly. So we need a neural mechanism that can coordinate these spatially and functionally distinct signals and somehow stamp them as belonging to the same object at the same moment.
And the research points directly to the parietal cortex as being maybe the chief assembly plant for object construction?
That's a good way to put it, absolutely. The parietal cortex, particularly the bilateral posterior parietal cortex, or PPC, acts as a critical hub for integrating this sensory information.
Is there clinical evidence for that?
Oh, very strong clinical evidence. Studies involving patients with PPC lesions, damage to that area, showed they perceived illusory feature conjunctions far more frequently than healthy individuals.
So if you damage the binding area...
If you damage the area responsible for binding, the free-floating features run wild. The system can't properly glue them together.
Right. But it's probably not just the PTC, is it? It's likely a network.
Oh, for sure. During an active search, when we're using that mental spotlight, the entire frontal-parietal attention network is engaged.
Okay, what are the key players in that network, and what are their specific jobs, roughly?
Well, we've identified several major nodes. The frontal eye fields, or FEF, are heavily involved in directing attention and planning eye movements. Think of them as deciding where to focus attention.
The commander deciding the target.
Kind of, yes. And then you have specific regions in the intraparietal sulcus areas, often labeled AIPS, PIPS, and IPTO. These seem more involved in managing the feature-specific information being held in temporary visual storage and verifying the location of the selected features.
So FEF directs, IPS regions manage the details.
That's a reasonable simplification. It's a highly specialized division of labor that manages the spatial aspects of focused attention and feature integration.
But the architecture alone doesn't solve the problem of time. FET proposed that binding requires these attention-dependent re-entrant processes signals looping back.
Yes, a feed-forward signal detects, and then a feedback signal verifies and binds.
How precise is the timing of this verification step? Can we actually measure that?
We can map it out with astonishing precision using techniques like EEG or MEG combined with psychophysics. There seem to be two critical time windows.
Okay.
The first is very early, roughly 90 to 120 milliseconds after the stimulus appears. This is that initial feed-forward signal, the rapid pre-attentive stage 1 feature detection. Your brain simply registers the presence of redness and Xness, for instance.
Just the raw features?
Just the raw features. And the second window is where the mental spotlight finally shines, where the attention-intensive binding occurs.
When's that?
That's typically in the 150 to 240 millisecond window after the stimulus. This is the critical period for the feedback or re-entrant processes.
And we know this feedback is necessary.
We do. Researchers proved the necessity of this precise timing by cleverly targeting a specific brain area, the angular gyrus, which is a key part of that parietal region we talked about.
What did they do?
They used non-invasive stimulation techniques like TMS to briefly inhibit the feedback connections originating from or passing through the angular gyrus only during that later 150, 240 meters window.
Okay, so they selectively jammed the feedback signal at the crucial time.
Exactly. And what happened?
What did happen?
When that reentrant process was inhibited during that specific late window, subjects could no longer accurately complete the discrimination task that required correct feature binding. They couldn't reliably tell if it was a red X or a blue O.
Wow, so they were relying on just the initial 90, 120 meters feed-forward signal.
And that wasn't enough for conscious, accurate binding. The angular gyrus seems to be a critical node where visual features, and potentially information from other senses too, are synthesized into a conscious perception. Blocking that return signal meant the conscious system couldn't verify that the redness belonged to the X.
That's incredible. That failure in a tiny 100-millisecond window exposes the necessity of this high-cost verification step. But if we drill down even further, how? How does the brain physically synchronize the signals coming from different brain areas? How do they know they all belong to the same object at the same time?
Like the how question. This is where we bring in neural oscillations, the brain's rhythm section, if you like.
Brainwaves.
Essentially, yes. The leading hypothesis is that features are bound through synchronized firing across distributed neural populations. When two groups of neurons, say one processing color and one processing location, fire in sync, their signals are temporarily linked and perceived as belonging to a unified object. It's like they're singing the same note at the same time.
Which rhythms, which frequencies are most important for this synchronization?
Well, the two primary rhythms implicated are alpha and gamma. Alpha activity, typically 8 to 12 hertz, is generally associated with long-range connectivity and top-down control.
Top-down control.
Meaning it's often involved in modulating or inhibiting activity. It functions somewhat like a global inhibitory rhythm, essentially acting as a filter or gatekeeper. By increasing alpha activity in visual areas not currently needed, the brain can suppress irrelevant visual input, helping manage the noise of stage 1.
So alpha is the conductor, maybe silencing the parts of the orchestra that aren't needed for the current piece?
That's a great analogy, exactly. And then you have gamma activity, much faster, 30 to 100 hertz or even higher. This reflects more rapid local processing, like within a specific visual area, and is thought to be heavily involved in the initial rapid feature encoding itself.
Local processing versus global control.
Right. And the current thinking, the integration theory, centers on the dynamic control achieved through alpha-gamma coupling. Alpha sets the stage, maybe by inhibiting distractors and managing the overall attentional state, allowing gamma to then synchronize the local features of the object that are currently under the mental spotlight.
So they work together.
They work together. It's thought to be the brain's elegant, high-speed solution to the binding problem, using rhythmic timing to coordinate distributed activity.
Okay, so if this two-stage system, verified by specific timing and neural rhythms, is the sort of universal hardware for our minds, does evolution use the exact same software for, say, a fish trying to hunt or a pigeon trying to navigate?
That's the next big question.
We need to know if the features that pop out for us are the same for them, or do differences emerge?
That is the comparative challenge. We look for conserved principles like, does the need for serial search and conjunction tasks hold across species? But we also look for differences, perhaps driven by species-specific environmental pressures or maybe different brain anatomy.
Let's start with the archerfish. I find these fascinating. Their visual search is literally a survival mechanism. They shoot jets of water to knock insects out of the air or off leaves. Precision matters.
The archerfish is a perfect non-human test subject for this. Researchers trained them to shoot at targets in visual search tasks, effectively mimicking human search experiments, but with a water jet instead of button press.
Clever.
And just like humans, the archerfish demonstrated the core principles of FIT.
How so? What did they find?
When the target differed by a single feature, say color, like a red target among green ones, the fish showed consistent fast shooting speed regardless of the number of distractors. Classic pop-out.
Okay, feature search is easy for them too.
Right. But when the task demanded a conjunction search, for instance, finding a small blue circle among other circles of varying size and color, their performance slowed down proportionally as the number of distractors increased.
They had to search serially.
Exactly. The necessity of serial attention for binding features seems to be conserved even in a fish brain, which is evolutionarily quite distant from ours.
But there was a twist, wasn't there? Their ability to use shape as a guide was dramatically different from ours. That seems like a major divergence.
It was a very intriguing difference. For us, shape differences, especially simple ones, often lead to pop-out. A circle among squares, for example. But the archerfish were remarkably poor at using shape for pop-out in these tests.
What shapes did they use?
They had to search serially for shapes like a simple disc hidden among distractors, shaped like Pac-Man. For humans, that disc would likely pop out. For the fish, it didn't. They had to check each item.
Why would shape be such a lower priority pre-attentive feature for them when you'd think recognizing prey shapes would be useful? Motion and color are clearly prioritized for hunting.
Well, researchers speculated on a couple of reasons. First, the specific shapes used, like discs and Pac-Man, might be evolutionarily novel for them. They might not have the dedicated neural circuitry for rapid recognition of those specific geometric shapes compared to core features like light contrast or color variation found in their natural aquatic prey.
So unfamiliarity makes sense. What was the other idea?
The second idea, which I find more intriguing, is that the Pac-Man shape, essentially an open mouth, might resemble a predatory threat to a small fish. If that were the case, the image wouldn't trigger top-out. Instead, it might trigger a threat response that forces a slower, more cautious serial inspection. It could effectively override the rapid stage 1 processing.
So fear or threat detection could dynamically alter the boundary between pre-attentive and focused attention. That's fascinating.
It suggests that attention isn't just a fixed computational process. It can be deeply modulated by instinct and context.
Okay, that's a fascinating layer of complexity. Attention isn't fixed, it can be hijacked by instinct. Now let's look at the pigeon, which processes a much more complex visual world, right? Involving both static and dynamic features simultaneously.
Pigeons are visual masters, no question. They navigate complex environments. Researchers challenged them with a really demanding discrimination task. They had to find a target defined by 4 concurrent binary-valued dimensions.
4 dimensions, like
2 static features, color, say red or green, and size, large or small, and 2 dynamic features, motion speed, fast or slow, and motion direction, up or down. They were looking for a very specific compound stimulus, like maybe a red small slow-up moving dot, among others with different combinations.
Wow, that requires massive feature integration. What did this highly demanding task reveal about their attentional strategy? How do they handle integrating static and dynamic info?
The key finding, and perhaps somewhat surprising compared to some human studies, was the apparent lack of attentional trade-offs between the static and dynamic features.
Meaning they didn't get worse at processing color when they also had to process motion.
Exactly. In fact, they often showed what's called redundant facilitation. When the target differed from distractors on multiple features, say both color and speed, they actually processed it faster than conditions where it only differed on a single feature.
Interesting. So rather than being bottlenecked by having to integrate static and dynamic features sequentially, they seem to handle them via multiple independent channels that run in parallel, providing an additive benefit.
That's the strong suggestion from these results. Their visual system appears structured to handle these distinct categories, static properties and dynamic properties, in parallel pathways, even though the ultimate binding still likely requires attention. This could allow them great efficiency in a complex, fast-moving environment, like flying.
Did they find some features easier than others?
Oh yes, there was a clear priority hierarchy. Element color and motion speed were consistently easier for the pigeons to discriminate than element size or motion direction.
And the hardest?
For all 4 tested birds, motion direction was unequivocally the most difficult feature to use for target discrimination, harder than size, color, or speed.
Interesting. So evolution seems to optimize attention based on ecological need. The pigeon prioritizes color and speed for navigation and foraging. The archerfish prioritizes color and contrast for targeting prey.
But the fundamental rule seems to remain. Binding features together requires attention, often serially.
Which brings us to our final and maybe most critical section, how we use this fundamental knowledge of FIT, pop-out, serial search, and these feature hierarchies to design visual interfaces where failure is not an option.
Exactly. We are talking about designing for what some call attention affordances, how the physical design of visual information itself influences what the user's attention system naturally prioritizes. This is absolutely non-trivial in high-stakes environments, like monitoring a nuclear reactor or piloting an aircraft. Mistakes can be catastrophic.
Okay. In the interface design studies, researchers look specifically at how to manage distraction, right? They tested 3 big theories, AAT, load theory, and dilution theory, using a display that mimicked a control panel.
That's right. It had things like barometers, steam generators, and crucially, a centrally positioned, highly salient distracting element they labeled the reactor. The goal was to understand how visual clutter impacts the search for critical information, specifically how it affects distraction from that central reactor icon.
Let's clearly define the competing predictions here, especially between load and dilution. Load theory, which is quite prominent in attention research, what does it predict about clutter?
Load theory suggests that if the visual display is extremely complex, high perceptual load, all of our limited attention capacity gets fully utilized just doing the main search task. Therefore, we should have fewer resources left over to even process irrelevant distractors.
So load theory predicts that high clutter should reduce the distracting influence of that central reactor because you're too busy looking for the target.
That's the core prediction. Conversely, dilution theory offers a more spatially oriented perspective. It argues that distractor interference is simply a function of the total number of objects, relevant or irrelevant, in the display.
How does that work?
If you increase the overall volume of visual elements, the distractor's influence is geometrically diluted, simply because attention is less likely to randomly land on or be captured by that one specific distracting object among many others. More items dilute its impact.
Okay, so load focuses on capacity, dilution focuses on spatial competition. How did they test this?
They introduced highly irrelevant but easily distinguishable graphical elements, they call them trend graphs, into the display. These graphs added visual clutter, but because they had a unique visual signature, a distinct shape perhaps, FIT predicts they wouldn't slow down the primary search for, say, a number on a barometer very much. They could be filtered out pre-attentively.
So the trend graphs added clutter, but were easy to ignore. They were the key to testing dilution versus load.
Precisely. And the finding was really quite counterintuitive, especially given the prominence of load theory. The data decisively supported the dilution theory.
Really? How so?
The highly salient central reactor distractor caused significant interference. It slowed down search only when the irrelevant trend graphs were absent. When those cluttering graphs were present, the interference from the central distractor basically vanished.
Wait, let me get this straight. You're saying adding more visual clutter, adding more irrelevant objects, actually reduced the negative impact of a very salient, potentially dangerous distractor.
That's what the data showed.
And it didn't slow the overall search much because our pre-attentive system could filter out that specific type of clutter.
Exactly. The irrelevant but filterable objects diluted the spatial attention resources that would have otherwise been captured by the central distractor. This provides an extraordinary and, as you said, counterintuitive design implication.
No shiz.
Cluttering a display with irrelevant but easily filterable objects might actually act as a buffer, reducing the interference of a critical, highly salient distracting object nearby. Designers must understand that the problem isn't always clutter per se, but perhaps the ratio of relevant items to salient distractors within a given space.
That completely flips conventional design wisdom, reduce clutter at all costs, on its head.
Amazing. Now, let's move to color, arguably the ultimate pre-attentive feature. These studies differentiated between 2 key uses of color in interfaces: guidance and capture.
Yes, this is critical. Color guidance is the standard use case. The user knows the target color beforehand. Look for the red warning light.
Right.
The studies confirm that color guidance works well. Targets that were colored were found faster than identical white targets. But critically, in this guidance scenario, the benefit was pretty uniform across individual colors: red, blue, yellow. It didn't matter much which color was used, only that it was a consistent cue the user was looking for.
Okay, that makes sense. If I know I'm looking for blue, blue pops out. But the situation changes drastically in an emergency, or for a novice user, where the user might be naive to the display or disoriented the color capture scenario.
Correct. This is when the target color is unknown beforehand. Here, the intrinsic properties of individual colors suddenly mattered a great deal because the brain had no top-down expectation or goal guiding it. What happened then?
In this unguided state, red distractors captured significantly more attention than any other color and actively slowed down the search for non-red targets. Red just grabs your attention involuntarily.
The universal warning color is a phenomenal distractor if you're not looking for it.
Precisely. Conversely, targets that were yellow, orange, or blue were found fastest when the target color was unknown. They seemed less likely to capture attention when they were distractors and easier to find when they were targets in this naive state.
So the design takeaway here is pretty stark. If you are designing an interface where an operator might be in a crisis and needs to find a specific target instantly, a target whose color they haven't memorized, you must be extremely careful about using highly attention-capturing colors like red for anything that isn't the primary urgent alert.
Absolutely. Using red for non-critical but salient elements could actively hinder the search for the real target. Maybe blue or yellow afford faster, less distracted search in those capture scenarios.
It shows color is your strongest ally for attention guidance. But if misapplied in a capture situation, it becomes your most effective enemy.
Well put. If you need to guide attention and the user knows the color, almost any distinct color will do. If you need to prevent unwanted attention capture, avoid colors like red for non-critical elements.
Okay, before we move off these interface studies, we have to address that fascinating anomaly they found regarding cognitive load. This is our internal working memory load, not the visual load on the screen.
Right. They had participants do the visual search while also trying to remember something, like a 5-letter sequence.
And load theory predicted that this high cognitive load taxing working memory should make things worse, right? It should increase the processing of the visual distractors.
Yes, the standard prediction based on some versions of load theory was that the high memory burden would deplete executive resources needed for filtering, making us less efficient at ignoring the visual distractors, leading to increased interference.
But that's not what they found.
No, the finding was entirely the opposite. High cognitive load was associated with faster visual search speed.
Faster, not slower.
Faster search times, yes.
Yep.
Albeit at a minor cost to accuracy, about a 1.5% drop, but still faster overall.
Why on earth would taxing working memory actually speed up visual search? That seems to completely violate the standard prediction.
It's a puzzling result, and it suggests maybe a shift in processing strategy under high cognitive demand. One possibility is that the extreme memory demand forces a kind of cognitive tunneling or intense prioritization on the visual task to get it done quickly.
Like, I can't afford to waste time searching carefully because I need resources for this memory task.
Perhaps. Instead of attempting to process every detail meticulously, which might be the preferred strategy under low cognitive load, the brain is forced to process the visual field faster, maybe making slightly quicker, less certain decisions, hence the small accuracy drop, just to free up cognitive resources.
So it's a strategic trade-off.
It could be. It's a surprising result that really highlights the complex, sometimes counterintuitive interplay between internal cognitive resources like working memory and external visual attention allocation. High internal load doesn't always mean worse external performance. It can change how you perform.
Fascinating. Finally, let's quickly look at how these core pre-attentive features translate into modern 3D digital environments, like video games, which are incredibly complex visual scenes.
Right. Does FIT hold up in immersive, dynamic 3D worlds? Researchers tested the classic pre-attentive attributes motion, color, and shape used as cues within the critical 250 millisecond pre-attentive window in a 3D game-like environment.
And what was the verdict?
The results largely reinforce the hierarchy of features we've been discussing. Motion and color achieved perfect or near perfect 100% detection accuracy within that short window. They are incredibly robust attention cues, even when spatial depth and complex textures are added.
You still pop out. And shape, once again, was the weak link.
Shape detection was significantly less reliable, registering only around 70% accuracy in that pre-attentive timeframe. This reinforces that unless shape differences are very drastic or perhaps highly familiar, shape is a much less effective pre-attentive feature in complex, dense digital scenes compared to the powerhouses of color or motion.
But you mentioned familiarity. did gaming experience matter?
Yes, interestingly, participants with significant prior gaming experience showed superior performance, specifically in the shape detection tasks.
Ah,
It suggests that familiarity and training, perhaps through thousands of hours interacting with digital objects, can potentially elevate the efficiency of shape processing, maybe pushing it closer towards the pre-attentive stage over time, at least for certain types of shapes common in those environments.
which mirrors the archerfish conclusion in a way. What pops out isn't entirely fixed. It can be trainable or evolutionarily selective based on experience and need.
Exactly. The basic rules apply, but experience can tune the system.
Wow. We've covered a remarkable amount of territory here, starting with that simple failure of time in the lab, the illusory conjunction, and moving all the way to designing high-stakes interfaces and navigating 3D game worlds.
We really confirmed the necessity of serial attention for binding features together. That's the core of FIT. We discovered that in complex environments, managing distraction is not just about reducing load, but sometimes, counterintuitively, about strategic dilution using filterable clutter to our advantage.
Right, the clutter buffer idea.
And we saw that color's effectiveness as an attentional tool hinges entirely on whether the user is in a state of color guidance, where they know the target color, or color capture where they don't.
The knowledge feels really actionable. For design, it means use simple feature differences like color or motion to make critical targets pop out immediately. Leverage stage 1. And if you have a dangerous, highly salient distractor that can't be removed, remember that sometimes adding irrelevant, easily filterable clutter nearby might be the very mechanism that saves the day by diluting that distractor's unwanted influence.
It's about understanding the rules of attention and designing with them, not against them.
And that ultimate synthesis brings us right back to that red X and blue O from the beginning, doesn't it?
It really does. That two-stage process of visual attention means that the world you consciously see as a coherent, unified, whole red X, a small blue circle, is actually the result of incredible resource-intensive neurological labor that happens just milliseconds beneath the surface of your awareness.
It feels so effortless, but it's not.
Not at all. It takes a failure, like an illusory conjunction or the extreme pressure of an emergency search task, to reveal the complex psychological and neural scaffolding required just to define a simple object in front of you. That unified world we perceive is an active moment-to-moment construction, painstakingly verified by feedback loops likely involving the parietal cortex, all orchestrated just for you to see seamlessly.